Heap,
Here.
League is excused. Mitchell? Here. Moreno? Here. Phillips? Here. Rigby?
Here.
And Stewart is excused. Counselor Mans, I don't know if she's on yet.
Yeah. I see Counselor Mann's present. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for attending our meeting tonight, Counselor Mans. The first item on the agenda is item number 3, a council update. So, Counselor Mans, if you'd like to give us a council update, we'd appreciate it.
Certainly. The main topic of our last meeting, or the most dramatic at least, was pickleball. We were approached by, or at the meeting, were both proponents of and proponents against pickleball at George Rogers Park. We decided as a council, after much testimony, study, etc., to allow pickleball at George Rogers Park in the short run, while directing staff to bring back to us recommendations of a more sustainable area in which to have pickleball that perhaps isn't as close to residences, or where we, I think that would be the main issue, is it wasn't as close to residences. We're hoping to have that in as quickly as possible, although I know the mayor and I asked for 3 months. That may not be quite possible, but it will be as quickly as staff can pull that together for us. Pickleball is a big sport in our city, if you're unaware of it. I guess it's nationwide, very active sport. And apparently the noise for some people is untenable, and not playing pickleball for some people is untenable. So we do hope to find a good solution as we work through this. But in the meantime, pickleball courts will remain open during limited hours. In addition to which, we decided, we brought in more properties in our annexation drive, if you will, or folks wanting to be annexed. We still have a friendly annexation policy. I don't foresee that changing in the very near future. Other than that, those were truly the large things. We chose not to go over a wastewater treatment update yet, because of the fact that we had pickleball, I believe, as well as some other factors that staff was pulling together for us. So that concludes my update. As I say, pickleball was the main thing at that meeting. Is there anything, any questions I can answer for anyone, or anything you'd like me to take back to council?
Well, commissioners, any questions for Councilor Mans? I don't see any questions. Hopefully I'm not missing anyone. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Perfect. Well, thank you, Councilor Mans, for giving us a good update tonight. We really appreciate it.
No problem. I will log off and listen to the meeting. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Yeah. So next on the agenda is item number 4. This is public comment. This is regarding issues not on the agenda. Iris, was there anyone who wished to make a public comment tonight?
Not at this time.
Okay. Having no one who wishes to make a public comment, we'll move on for the Commission for Citizen Involvement general updates. I didn't have anything for Commission for Citizen Involvement. So we'll move into our first regular item on the agenda, which is a work session. This is item 6.1, non-conforming residential development work session number 2, PP 22-002, LU 22-0008. Public comments are accepted. The Commission will continue its review of the requirements for non-conforming residential development. The staff coordinator is Scot Siegel, Director of Community Development. Director Siegel, would you like to start the presentation tonight on non-conforming residential development?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Heap. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. This item is a continuation of the Planning Commission's work on a review of the code requirements for non-conforming residential development. And so what I'd like to do is just provide a little bit of background and to bring everyone up to date as we have new commissioners on what that means, what non-conforming development is, how it's regulated, and the process and really the charge that we received from the commission and the city council earlier this year to investigate this topic. Then I'd like to hand over to Jessica Murray Collins, our senior development specialist, who, for those of you who were on the tour in May, Jessica helped organize and facilitate that. She has some data that I think will be useful, as well as some slides and some sort of a refresher on what we saw on the tour, just hoping that that'll help kind of get the thought process started on this. So the city development code it regulates land use and zoning, and sort of a normal convention of zoning ordinances is that they provide for adaptation and changes over time. And one of the ways that they do that, one of the ways that we do that through zoning, is to acknowledge and accept development patterns, land uses, lots that have been created under prior codes that were lawfully established under a different set of regulations. And as the code is amended over time, those uses or developments or lots are essentially, for lack of a better word, grandfathered in. But the terminology in the code is that they're regulated as permitted, albeit non-conforming developments or non-conforming uses. And then when there is some change to the property, to the use or the structure, or the lot is subsequently divided or reconfigured, then the code also sets forth a process and a set of criteria for how those changes are processed, whether they're permitted, to what extent changes to that non-conforming development or use or lot are allowed. And our code is really no different. We have a set of regulations that for residential development are fairly forgiving in terms of what, to what extent a dwelling can be remodeled or added on to when it is a non-conforming development and still maintain those non-conforming rights. And so just to kind of put this on the ground, an example, a fairly common example of a non-conforming development in a residential neighborhood is where the house was constructed under, again, a prior set of regulations or even before zoning perhaps, and the structure does not meet the minimum yard setback requirements of today. So that is one example. That's a fairly common example. Other examples include, structures that were built before the city had building design standards, and our code is somewhat unique, or it has a fairly complex set of building design standards that came about in the really the mid 2000s, the 2000s and later, that regulate everything from garage orientation and design to the slope or the setback area in a three-dimensional envelope for new construction or remodels. Those are examples of regulations that were adopted more recently, that any dwelling that was constructed prior to the 2000s wouldn't have been required to comply with those standards. They didn't exist. So when we have builders or property owners who are wishing to remodel or add on to their homes, or in some cases merely replace their homes, but really do substantial remodels, the code does allow for the development to maintain a certain degree of nonconformity, or the nonconformity that exists and was lawfully established. So if that, the side wall on a house was placed at 5 feet to the property line in the 1960s or the 1970s, and then the code subsequently changed, and today requires a setback of 10 or 15 feet, just for example, that wall can remain. And in fact, the house can be significantly, remodeled, altered. Much of the house can be removed, provided that that wall remains standing, and it's reflected as remaining on building permit plans, and then that wall is allowed to continue. So That's just sort of a kind of a thumbnail outline of what non-conforming development is, how we regulate it. There's a lot more to it. But really the key issue and the reason that this was brought, the Planning Commission had taken this up, is that during the city's work on the Middle Housing Code amendments last year and even earlier, it really one of the concerns I think that was raised was that with middle housing, perhaps there would be more demand and there would be more situations where non-conforming dwellings are remodeled or converted into middle housing, and that middle housing would end up being a larger volume, a larger structure on the lot, and that would be an imposition on neighbors. I think generally that was the thought process. We know today that the housing code or the standards for middle housing do not allow any larger building form or volume or height or any greater floor area than what would be permitted for a single family home. So that may or may not be a concern, but the concern remains that because our code is so forgiving in allowing non-conforming structures to remain on a lot, and a dwelling can be nearly entirely removed and still maintain that non-conforming right, that when redevelopment occurs, whether it's for middle housing or just simply a larger house, that you've heard, I think, from some members of the public that this is an imposition on neighbors, and it may be out of character with the neighborhood. So that's really one set of concerns relating to non-conforming development. I think the other set of concerns really had more to do with demolition. And in fact, the city council has amended the code to address, at least in part, the concerns that were brought to you earlier this year relating to demolition. Those concerns were pertaining to really kind of the same set of circumstances where an existing dwelling would be almost entirely removed, and then you would still maintain a wall or maybe a smaller portion of the house. And because of that, it didn't meet really the threshold for demolition. So it wasn't regulated in the way that a demolition project would be regulated, which includes notification to the neighbors, payment of a demolition tax, and so on. So the council did earlier this year, as the commission is aware, amend the demolition code so that today the code requires the code provides for a demolition permit process where more than 50% of the exterior walls of a dwelling or more than 50% of the perimeter foundation of a dwelling are removed, then a demolition permit is required. The project pays a demolition tax. And so we've addressed that side of, or that set of concerns, we think, or at least the council has addressed that set of concerns, although the city, as you may recall, did not amend the regulations for non-conforming development. So the opportunity, or I guess the situation still exists where one could remove almost the entire dwelling, and although it may trigger the demolition permit process and they pay the demolition tax, it wouldn't sort of trigger full conformity to the code. So that's really the benefit. And I should have started with that. The benefit of having a non-conforming, having a set of regulations that allow for the continuation of non-conforming development is that you have, for the property owner, they have a certain amount of flexibility, and they also have certainty that they can remodel, they can add on, they can in fact rebuild almost the entire dwelling and still maintain that non-conforming right. When the city council changed the code for demolition, it didn't affect that. It only changed the requirements for demolition permits and the tax. So now the question is being brought back before the Planning Commission and ultimately the city council as to whether the city should align those two in some way, and the criteria need not be the same for demolitions as for non-conforming development. But the policy question remains: should there be a change in the threshold for when a non-conforming development can remain, or when the non-conforming structure is considered to be abandoned or is removed, and then in turn any new development has to fully conform and really any development on the lot would have to fully conform to the code. So that's the background. Sorry if this is a repeat for some of you, but I wanted to go over it. And before I hand over to Jessica to present what she has, I'll just pause for any questions.
Thank you, Director Siegel. Commissioners, are there any questions? Yeah, I can't see. Is it Commissioner Rigsby? Did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I know the notification system is not going to work in these circumstances. Could you expound on the kind of full extent of circumstances that would create or cause a structure to be non-conforming? You know, we've looked at you know, whether it isn't within the sort of envelope that is required with the setbacks and planes, et cetera, or you know, maybe a commercial use in a residential district, but you know, how deep does that go? Does it go into more sort of building code aspects of things, or you know, because there are, of course, plenty of circumstances where, you know, a building exists that would not be allowed to be built today.
Yeah, Commissioner Rigby, that's a good question. And there are other parallel requirements and allowances in other codes that address a similar issue. The development, what we're discussing this evening is specific to the development code. And that really the standards and Jessica will have some examples and some data, so this will become clearer. But typically, it's setbacks. It might be lot coverage is exceeding the maximum allowable lot coverage. It could be the height of the structure. It could be a floor area. Other examples of standards, building design standards, as I mentioned earlier, include requirements for garage appearance and orientation and design. It could be driveway spacing. There are a number of architectural standards, some of which are unique to individual neighborhoods. In certain overlay zones, there are requirements for roof pitch, or a front porch is required to be built in the first edition neighborhood. Really unique in that first edition has a network of alleys, and the neighborhood plan and the overlay for first edition require that in most circumstances, access is taken from the alley. So a garage or a carport may only access from the alley. There are exceptions for some corner lots, but those are examples of actual building configurations and designs that exist today that one could remodel the building and really remove almost the entire structure and maintain that non-conforming garage design, or maintain the structure that doesn't have a front porch, even though notwithstanding the front porch requirement of that zone. So that hopefully that answers your question. There are other codes, as you mentioned. The building code has certain allowances for structural, electrical, mechanical, plumbing. That depending on to what extent you're remodeling a structure may trigger compliance with today's building code. Although that's not really before you. It's not regulated through the development code. It's regulated by the state and the state building code. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. Just as a bit of a follow-up, you mentioned that there are beyond just like siting and that sort of thing. There are design standards for different neighborhoods and that sort of thing. That and some of those are intending to create kind of a stylistic identity for different neighborhoods. That's correct? Yep. Yeah,
generally that's the intent. Mm-hmm.
So, so could we get a situation here where, someone's removing 50% of the walls and then, adding on another wing to the house, and then the rest of the structure would need to be kind of rebuilt in a different style? Could that be something that would happen?
Yeah. So one of the potential consequences here, and you'll see it in the staff memo. It's a value judgment, and that's really why this is before you. It's a policy issue, policy question as to whether, to what extent the code should be encouraging new develop or encouraging remodels and additions to, bring the entire project or the entire structure into conformance with the code, or to what extent, the code should continue to allow for those pre-existing, conditions and allow them as a legal non-conforming development, even though it may be a very long time, it may be for many years until, we would see that lot, fully, we would see development on that lot fully conform to the code. So sort of this trade-off between, achieving the vision of a neighborhood or, the ultimate standard that the code provides, and allowing that flexibility and adaptation for property owners.
Thank you.
Commissioner Phillips, did you have a comment or question? Sorry, Commissioner Phillips, if you were wanting to speak, you can go ahead.
There you go. Sorry, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the numbers here a bit. The demolition, which it appears that we're on the verge of changing the code to make 50% or more of the walls, interior walls, and the base, and anything over that, it's a demolition after that. That's correct. Okay.
That's correct. The council has made that change, and that's in effect now.
Right. That's right. It's already been done. That's correct. But now it seems to be you're asking, there's a potential policy question that do we want to line the development with some number? And it looks like there's two options. Am I correct, 50 and 80%? Or is that something totally different?
Oh, well, that's just illustrative. I mean, there are many options, and staff is not proposing, or recommending a particular option or even the policy direction that you might go. I mean, one option is to do nothing and to leave it the way it is. And, another option is to change it to something else. And then that's, a longer discussion about what you would recommend after conducting a hearing on it.
Okay. I'm not sure, I'm not a big fan of changing something just to be changing it. Conformity, I'm not so hung up on everything being conformed, especially when you drive around the city and you see the houses are so different and every house seems to have a different circumstance. But it also, I think the long-term goal of the city, is to get as many properties in conformity with code as possible and still maintain the flavor of the neighborhood, flavor being my word. So it seems to me if we want to get closer to reconciling these two situations, the 50% number for nonconformity, if you go above 50% on the walls and stuff, would get us close to conformity. Am I off base here, or is that the way I'm understanding it? Is that correct?
Well, any threshold that the city that you might recommend that the council adopts would then, that would be a requirement where you pass that threshold, and really you need to bring the structure, if it's a non-conforming structure, into full conformance with the code. So, whether it's, passing 50% or, passing 80% triggers it. I mean, there are real consequences to that, whatever if you were to change it. What happens then is that the development, whether it's a new development or redevelopment, has to be in full conformance with the code, the setbacks, lot coverage, height, floor area, building design standards, garage, all of that. And, that may be, reducing what is allowed, well, it would be, in many cases, it would be limiting development. It'd be reducing development potential on a lot. So, there's a limit, a reduction in, property rights essentially that might happen there. Another, potential consequence is that, non-conforming development, well, in one scenario where the development is closer to the property line than it would otherwise be allowed to be located, may afford more flexibility to actually preserve a tree on the other side of the lot, if that's the scenario, that there's a significant tree, that the tree code says that we need to look at, reasonable alternatives to save the tree. If, the structure is altered to the extent that under an amended code, it now must be brought into full conformance, then, there may be that builder or property owner might be more inclined to, all right, well, I need to slide this plan over by 10 feet. And now I'm going to be building into the, envelope where that tree is. So, I mean, there are a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of potential unintended consequences from this. So, we really want to help you study this and evaluate it. That's really what the work session is for, is to try to bring forward the data to help you evaluate it.
Thank you, Director Siegel. I was just going to add on to that and say to the other commissioners, I think as we're going through the work session tonight, as we always do, we're looking at what are the things that we want to bring in front of the public for hearing. What are the items we think should be considered, and we should receive public input on related to demolition, non-conforming development, and the impacts that has on our development code. So again, we're not going to deliberate or try to choose certain solutions tonight, but I think the goal of the work session here is, as Director Siegel was saying, to try to vet out and try to give a recommendation to staff on what type of issues are we concerned about, so that, we can put those forward to the public, take public input, and then try to make a recommendation. And so along those lines, Director Siegel, I was going to ask, some of the things that I think of that would be most concerning, which I think we're touching on, would be the setbacks, the lot coverage, the height, the design standards. I don't know, but that's why I'm wondering, should we be more analytical in this? And is there any data that we could pull to say, for development that's been done to non-conforming code, what type of feedback have we got, or what type of problems have we heard in the past? I would imagine, I'm guessing, again, it's like things we're just discussing, the basic things like non-conforming setbacks, non-conforming height, non-conforming lot coverage, and possibly design standards. But I think if we could see some of that data to say, based on the development that we've seen, fairly recently in Lake Oswego, these are the type of non-conforming issues that we commonly see. And then do we have any data to show what type of, concerns have been raised by the community to say, hey, this isn't something that they're real happy with, and then we can start looking at changes for that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Heap. That's a great segue, actually. And Jessica has prepared some data and some slides that I think will help at least begin to scratch the surface on this. I will say that we have not received a lot of input from the public on this. The Middle Housing Advisory Committee, although this was not a focus of the committee, it was something that they had observed, and they did make a recommendation that we consider amending the code, but it wasn't their primary focus. We have heard from some members of the public, including the representatives of the First Edition neighborhood who came before the Planning Commission earlier, and I think has also commented at the City Council. So there is some interest in this, but we haven't done really any broader outreach around it beyond what we did with our work group that you heard from earlier this year. So what would you like for us to move on? And,
sure.
Okay, thank you. Jessica, are you prepared to go ahead and present?
Yes, I am. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Jessica Maury-Collins, Senior Development Specialist. I prepared some slides. First couple slides are just kind of going over some of the information that Scot Siegel has already gone over. So the first is just an overview of the issue at hand, the kind of dilemma of, how do we conserve sort of the neighborhood character and the style of some of these unique older structures, while also encouraging new development to come into conformance with the code. So that's kind of the question at the heart of the study session. Under the current code, looking at structures more so than uses or some of these other kind of conformance issues, there are a few options provided for maintaining or keeping your existing non-conforming structure. You can continue your use of a non-conforming structure so long as everything else on the site is otherwise lawful. You can maintain a non-conforming structure, and there's some exclusion there in the definition of maintenance. Specifically says that maintenance does not include structural alteration, so that limits what you can do to maintain a non-conforming structure. You can expand a non-conforming structure as long as that expansion does not increase the degree of non-conformity or have any other code compliance issues. So basically anything that's new on the site does have to comply with code. This comes up most often with like a single-story dwelling that is maybe closer to a setback than it's supposed to be. Somebody wants to build up, add a little bit more space to their home. They would have to step that second story back, kind of like a cake. You can also expand a non-conforming wall through a minor variance process, but of course that requires a variance to legalize the wall. And you can modify the roof pitch. This was a standard initially created, as I understand, to facilitate drainage issues. There were a lot of particularly detached garages with flat roofs that started to have drainage issues, and putting this sort of relief valve in the code was to allow the drainage issue to get addressed. And then finally, you can rebuild a non-conforming structure if it's damaged by any cause other than an intentional act of the owner. So, demolishing a structure, deconstructing part of a structure in order to build is not qualifying damage. So in terms of data, I looked at the plan reviews that took place between February 2021 and 2022. And I looked specifically at structural permits, so excluding any new residential dwellings, anything where they demolished a dwelling and rebuilt something totally new or any totally new builds. We had 402 total structural permit applications, about 107 that were kind of serious remodel or addition projects on residential structure. So taking out anything like a pool or a new deck or an accessory structure. 36 out of those projects were found to have possible non-conforming features, portions of the structure or site, and 25 of those projects modified existing non-conforming structures. Of those 25 projects, all but one kept their non-conforming feature through the development process, so that's 6% total of the structural permit reviews during that time period that resulted in retention of a non-conforming portion of a structure. So of the 25 remodel projects on existing non-conforming structures, 8 were non-conforming to multiple standards, 17 were non-conforming to only one standard. 18 of those conformance issues were to dimensional standards, so looking at setbacks, height, lot coverage, basically the shape and size of where the dwelling can go on the lot. 4 were non-conforming, so 15 of those were non-conforming to setbacks, 4 were non-conforming to lot coverage, and 1 was non-conforming to the reduced height allowed for dwelling on a flag lot. So those are the, when the lot's kind of sited behind another lot and accessed via an access lane. 8 of the existing structures had garages that did not comply, or did not conform, rather, to the garage appearance and location standards. And 2 of those structures had other non-conforming features, setbacks, lot coverage, And one structure had been developed across lot lines, but it was a unified site, so kind of somebody owned two lots that were adjacent to each other that had a house across them. Not sure how it happened, but it did. Looking at setbacks specifically, the 15 structures that were non-conforming to setbacks, 8 of those were non-conforming to more than one setback. 12 were non-conforming to the side setbacks, so it's the most common place where you'll find that issue, and I think that kind of bears out with the development community of width of a structure, kind of where they're looking for, flexibility, I think, often in the code. 6 to front setbacks, 3 to rear. One structure was non-conforming to the Oswego Lake setback, and then 1 to RP district setback, so that's a sensitive land, like a stream or a wetland. And then just as a quick refresher on the tour, or if anybody wasn't able to attend the tour, we visited 5 sites, and there's a list of the sites here, which is kind of summary information about the zone and what the structure is non-conforming to or was non-conforming to. So we had a pretty diverse set of sites, multiple levels of zoning density, and multiple standards that were non-conforming. The first site we visited was 1948 Maple Leaf Road in the R7.5 zone. The existing structure was non-conforming to the rear setback, and this structure ended up being approved through a minor variance process. They began to, deconstruct the existing dwelling and found dry rot in the wall that they intended to retain, so had to reapply as a dwelling and legalize the rear wall through a minor variance. The next site we visited was 425 Furnace Street, which is located in the RDD zone, which is the Old Town neighborhood. And that structure is non-conforming to both, I think, one side setback. And this development was able to be approved under the current code. You can kind of see, I don't know if I have a laser on this, but the top wall there, along that top side lot line, you can see how they sort of step the new development back in to meet the setback. This project, and sorry, I should have said for the prior, added 663 square feet of floor area. And we'll go back to that. Maple Leaf Road, because it ended up being a complete new dwelling, added nearly 4,000 square feet of floor area. The next site we visited was 764 2nd Street in the R6 zone, and this structure is non-conforming to the R6 access and dwelling design standards. So it, again, as Director Siegel had mentioned, the R6 zone has alleys behind most of the residential lots and requires that if a lot has alley access, that's where vehicle access and storage, we have a garage or a carport or just a parking area, the access for an automobile is supposed to be off the alley rather than the front street. So they, in this case, retained the existing street-facing garage, added 840 square feet of floor area, and they also were able to keep a substandard front porch. So the front porch width in the R6 zone is, they have certain dimensions that it has to meet. So the front porch that they ended up getting approved for is smaller than what the current code would require. The next site that we looked at is 667 3rd Street, just down the street. And this is a property that's not currently in, doesn't have a permit application in for development, but we're looking, prospectively, where are lots that were, maybe more likely to see this middle housing or, some of these higher density neighborhoods, walkable neighborhoods that might have more impetus to change the development type. And this is a structure where the photo here is the street side. So again, this is a property that's non-conforming to the garage appearance and location standards under the building design code, as well as to setbacks and lot coverage. And the last property that we visited is 1148 North Shore Road in the R10 zone. And this property was originally non-conforming to setbacks, lot coverage, and floor area. This original structure was non-conforming to all of its setbacks. But you can see on the right that the lot is fairly constrained. It's a substandard sized lot. So really, doesn't provide a very large or workable building envelope to construct a dwelling in. So in this case, the applicant went forward with a residential infill design variance. So they legalized the new structure using the variance process in order to keep some of the non-conforming dwelling dimensions. The next 3 slides summarize the code concepts that you will have in your memo on the subject. So that first question, as has been discussed a bit so far, is that one option that could be considered is using the same threshold for bringing a non-conforming structure into compliance as for the new demolition definition. So that would be 50%. And the positives to that approach would be bringing more properties into conformance, including conformance to neighborhood overlay requirements and some of these standards that people are noticing are out of compliance in their neighborhoods. And on the flip side, this does impact development rights and potentially would result in more demolitions and also possibly more tree removal. Alternately, that threshold might be placed at a different percentage of development or established in some other form. The next question is if there should be a limit on a non-conforming dwelling, how much can be added onto the dwelling, even if there's no increase in non-conformity. So, for example, you have a dwelling that is closer to a setback than it's supposed to be. Should there be some, amount of floor area or lot coverage that, is limited in adding to that lot based on that non-conformity? So again, the positives for this approach is that remodels might be more in character with the neighborhood, especially in these overlay zones that do have design standards, or there's, some of the neighborhoods like the Old Town neighborhood, the RDD zone, where there are, historic landmarks or properties or surrounding residences are similarly non-conforming. So a lot of the properties on the lake where, there's more perhaps non-conforming dwellings than dwellings that comply with the current code standards. So might be a way to be a little bit more flexible. Again, this is a development right issue and might lead to more demolitions and tree removal. And then finally, the commission might want to consider whether having a pre-submittal meeting with staff or a formal pre-application conference with neighborhood input could be required for building permits when a non-conforming portion of the building is going to be retained. So this could potentially streamline plan review down the line, but of course requires additional staff time and input to set up the process, and so that does have kind of its pros and cons as well. So that's all I have for the presentation. Happy to answer any questions, and if anybody has anything further they'd like to know, happy to help.
Commissioners, questions? Sorry, Iris, I can't see the chamber. I'm not sure if anybody's requesting to speak. I don't see any questions. Commissioner Rigsby?
Thank you. looking at the memo and then looking at the, what would you call it, the proposed language underneath, I wanted to ask about, I think it's a little kind of Roman numeral lowercase 3 here in the proposed language, because I didn't see it kind of talked about in those matters kind of with the pros and cons above. And this is about applications to demolish less than whatever % of the exterior walls, and then saying that under that circumstance, there would be XYZ requirements. Considering that we're looking at exterior walls being, kind of, we're talking about, it's not defined as specifically being, linear perimeter area or something like that. I mean, being less than 50%, could that be as little as, a door opening, or, like something 1 foot wide?
So I'm sorry, the question is whether the sort of minimum threshold could be set that low in terms of change, or?
Yeah, and just applying to that line item, they're saying, it's saying demolishing less than 50%. Under that, would there be sort of any minimum threshold?
And I think I might be able to help here, Commissioner. I believe you're referring to the exhibit. I think it's attachment B, page 1 of 6. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, good. So this was the language that was developed with the work group that staff had pulled together, and what you heard from earlier this year. And the concept here was, and I think the subsection A little 2, or maybe it was little 3, that this was a provision for, where the plan was to retain non-conforming walls. And so if it were less than 50% or less than 80% were removed, and it didn't trigger full conformity, so to speak, then we were looking at, what sort of plan submittal requirements would we need? What kind of exhibits, elevations, certification by an engineer, what sort of documentation would staff request, so that we could review that plan to determine if in fact, the walls that they're representing as retained can actually be retained. So that's kind of the nuance there. The threshold being, anything more than 50% or 80%, whatever the decision would be on that, would in fact be, demolition. It would also trigger full conformity to the code, and we would not be requiring, these submittal, sort of these plans and exhibits if it was passing that threshold, because it would have to start anew and fully conform. Does that help? I hope so.
Oh, yes, thank you. That is what I'm referring to. I'm just, it sounds ridiculous, but, so we're looking at in this, what's been, drafted up here, these two categories, like you say, above, say, 50% and below 50%. But I am wondering, for below 50%, where, then we have these written out, you need a site plan, you need an engineer, et cetera, how far down does that go if we're saying just less than 50%?
Yeah, and I think the key issue here, and Jessica can jump in, is really where the proposal is to retain some non-conforming portion of the structure, then you've got to sort of provide the burden of proof that what you're representing can in fact be retained. And it's, if you're removing everything around it, you're removing all of the walls around it, and you're leaving up that one portion of a wall with a threshold, with a doorway opening, then we would be looking for, at least under this concept, some documentation to show that in fact can be retained. So it may be just that doorway. If the standard were, you've got to retain at least 10% of the structure or the perimeter wall, and that 10% is just a portion of a wall with a door opening, then, that we would be scrutinizing that. That's what we would be looking at.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you.
So I think, am I understanding the question correctly, that the concern is that if we're requiring additional documentation for plans that do not meet the threshold to come into conformance, there's the possibility that there'd be minor projects that, are doing pretty minimal changes to existing non-conforming structures that might then have to provide all of this additional engineering and what have you that costs money and
On its face,
time.
it looks pretty broad.
Right, yeah. And that was a question that definitely came up even looking at the data and trying to cull, which are the projects that this is relevant to. The way that we've been discussing this, it does seem like that minimum, at what point we would require additional documentation is left pretty ambiguous. So I don't know that that would be a fruitful, limit to set in code, but it might be something to discuss and think about in terms of policy and how we would, as a staff, if there's a certain extent of change that would need to be proposed in order for the staff to reasonably request additional information from applicants.
Kind of going off of that and back to sort of what Chair Heap was talking about before, would it be possible, as we come back to this process, would it be possible to look at some information on what area localities are doing, how they've approached this situation, or comparable codes?
Yeah, and I'm not sure what exhibit it is, but we do have a table that one of our planners, Courtney Sims, has put together of information about other similar jurisdictions, similar sized jurisdictions that have a non-conforming code. And so, yeah, we do have a table of that information. I didn't put it in the presentation, though, so I can't pull it up.
I think it would be interesting as we engage with, the public, with the city, et cetera, to bring that and kind of and an analysis of, the pros and cons of their approaches into what we're talking about.
Yeah, Commissioner Reby, there is some information on this. It's not exhaustive, but it's in attachment C, beginning at attachment D.
At the end of the memo
Yeah,
here.
very end of the memo.
I have
Thank
it
you.
printed out, but that doesn't do much good for the group.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other questions for staff? I see none. I would like to open it up for public comment at this time, so we can take comments on what are the concerns, things the public may want the commission to consider as we go through hearings. Iris, was there anyone who wished to make a public comment on non-conforming development tonight?
She's talking with two people in the audience at the moment.
She's checking.
Okay, I'll wait, no problem.
There's a little red button on your mic. No, it's just on your microphone. Here, there is someone at the dais now, or the, not the dais, the testimony desk.
Chair Heap, we do have a citizen who'd like to comment.
Oh, sure. If they'd like to come to the microphone and just
She's-
state their name for the record, and then please give your public comment for the commission
She's
to hear
there.
tonight. Okay, thank you. You just give your name and please give us your public comment. And
Oh.
thanks for coming tonight and sharing, information with the commission.
Okay, so it's more a question. My name is Audrey Lathan Green, and my family have a house on Upper Drive. And so my mother was concerned, do they lose the value within the property because of all this?
Right. So I
So
think,
does it affect the value if she was to want to sell it or whatever because of all these new codes and zoning and stuff? Does it affect the value of the home?
Chair Heap, I can perhaps respond. Thank you for your comment. My name is Scot Siegel. I'm the Community Development Director for the city, and it's a very good question. And before the city would initiate any code change, we evaluate the regulations to see if it does have, in fact, the potential to limit the use of one's property or potentially reduce the value of the property. And if the proposal does have the possibility of that, then every property owner or every property owner who would potentially be affected by the code change is notified of the public hearing that would be before the Planning Commission. So the commission is not at that stage yet. They're studying the issue. As you may have heard in the presentation from staff, that is one of the potential consequences of regulating what we're calling non-conforming development more rigorously than the city does today, that it may in fact limit the use of private property for some properties, for those properties that have non-conforming development today. So we're very cognizant of that, and it's something that the city takes very seriously. So I think really what I would suggest to you is if by commenting this evening, we have your name. If you would like to, receive information as the city continues to study this, I'd be happy to include your name on a list of interested residents.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Iris, is there anyone else who wishes to make public comment tonight?
No, there's not.
All right, I would like to then close the public comment session for this. And then commissioners, what I was thinking was if we could show the staff report again with the questions to the commission, maybe we can just walk through those questions and give feedback to staff on what the commission's thoughts are.
What was the question?
The question was, can we show the staff report where it lists the section where it lists the questions for the commission to consider and give feedback to staff, and then we'll walk. Yeah, the presentation. Yeah, sorry, and then we'll give that feedback. We'll just kind of walk through each one of those questions. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there a particular slide that would be helpful?
Can't hear you.
And the commissioners may need to let Iris know if they want to address the chair, because I don't know, Chair, if you're able to see commissioners.
Yeah, no, I'm not able to see.
About where on the presentation did you want
Is there
her to go?
a specific slide? Was it just the code concepts, the kind of different
Yeah,
options?
that's just. I was going to say this: the codes, concepts, the different options. It was like the first set of questions that was in the presentation. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I think there was like 3 or 4 slides and different questions to the commission.
Okay.
We can start with the first one. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
To see the same questions.
Okay, this is the first code concept, so looking at the threshold, if the threshold for bringing a property into conformance should be set at the same amount of development or in the same fashion as for the new definition of demolition, or if there should be some other kind of, threshold set for that.
On this? Sorry, it was there, but it went away.
Would it be possible we could pull up the memo? Is that available? I think the memo has all of the questions on one page.
Memo
No.
from when? Which memo?
For the study session tonight. I think it's in the same folder on Laserfish. Yeah, does this help with kind of giving some context for the discussion?
We have it locally. So again, the first one is on page 3 of 23 of the staff memo, and it says, should residential nonconformities not be allowed to continue when a dwelling is demolished 50% or more? So I think my personal opinion here is that this is a question that because it came up and was, we got such strong feedback to the commission to look at this. This is something that we should, put forth in a hearing and continue to take feedback on. I think the alternative that's mentioned is establishing a different threshold for full conformity. That can also be considered, as we were discussing earlier. But the main question itself should be taken, and then the different threshold can also be vetted to see what makes sense. Commissioners, any comments or feedback on that? And sorry, I cannot see the chamber there. If somebody has a comment or
Yes,
question.
Commissioner Mitchell has a question.
Sure, go ahead, Commissioner Mitchell.
Thank you. I think this question might be for Jessica. Were you able to call from the data on I think it was 107 residential permits, those that were longtime property owners just adding to their structures versus professional developers that bought land and built, and the distinction between the two?
I didn't look specifically at who was originating the project. You can kind of guess. Just the smaller projects are more likely to be kind of property owner working with a contractor rather than a large developer organization. So it was, it ultimately was I think around 35, 36 that kind of raised concerns that it was this sort of development that was perhaps taking advantage of the non-conforming development allowances in such a way to kind of maximize their value of the property, which, and get that largest building envelope possible. So I'd say 35 or so were larger scale remodel projects that raised that question. And then, there's just such a range of development activities going on. It would be, I don't want to hazard a guess at how it breaks down, but Yeah, those were kind of the ones that was about 35 that looked like it was worth asking the question.
Sure, okay, thank you.
Do you, commissioners, other questions? No? So does the commission feedback, the commission in general agreement that the question on the staff memo of item number 1, should residential nonconformities be allowed to continue when a dwelling is demolished? Do we agree that we'd like to put that out for public input at a public hearing? Move ahead. Commissioner Rigby? Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to make sure the commission is aware of the difference between going to a public hearing and continuing to study this through work sessions. So
Sure.
Really the main difference is that the public hearing would involve notifying every property owner who is potentially affected by that change, which is over 10,000 properties in the city. And we're prepared to do that if the commission's wanting to move forward with a code amendment concept or concepts, alternatives. We can do that. The other option would be, to continue to kind of study this and also solicit public comment, albeit informal and not through that extensive notification process.
Good point, Director Siegel. I may have been jumping the gun a little bit there to suggest that we go straight to a public hearing. But yeah, I think that's really good input because, we heard a lot, I think, when we were looking at, middle housing, as you had mentioned earlier, and it seems to have died away, a lot of the comments that we were getting. So I think there may be some value in continuing a work session and maybe through informal methods, continue to get more input and try to better understand the problem a little bit more. Again, Commission, does others want to give their feedback?
Mr. Rigby would like to speak.
Yeah, okay, go ahead, Commissioner Rigby.
Thank you, Chair Heat. I do think that would be a good idea to maybe try to gestate this a little longer, because just to me, looking at it, I think having, just going straight to this sort of, to me, sort of stark idea of, 50% or more full code compliance, that looking over what other places are doing in the area, it doesn't look like that's a very common approach. So I think coming to this from a standpoint of, what does the community, want to do here, and what are we trying to achieve? Is it, compliance as quickly as possible? Is it, I don't like that my neighbor's too close to my property. What are we trying to achieve? Like it was mentioned in the memo with the trees, bringing that in and maybe starting from a standpoint of, what is the goal here, rather than, should we or shouldn't we adopt a specific number or a specific approach. Yes, I think starting from a more basic level would be beneficial here.
Commissioners, any other input? So it sounds like the commission then would suggest for more work sessions, to do more outreach, try to collect a little bit more information on, what are some of the more common methods and, that other communities are using to address nonconformity. Maybe the commission can study kind of the closer and come up with a new set of questions too, based on what was included in the staff report for today at the end as the attachment. But continuing on with the another work session, it seems like it would be advantageous so that we're sure we're asking the right questions and we're getting the right feedback. Two comments I was going to make was just looking at the data there that was in the staff presentation. I think the staff presentation was excellent, so thank you. But the typical issues were kind of matching up with the data. So we should be looking at the setbacks, the height, the lot coverage, and then maybe certain key design aspects as we're seeing, like some of the entrances, that a couple of those examples with good garages. And then to follow on to the other commissioners' comments to say, were there certain areas that this was applying to. I think, as was mentioned earlier, really the problem comes from the fact that this is kind of older development that had a set of different code. And so, obviously I think the some of the developments that are older in nature, whether it's the downtown district, the first edition, but the older the developments that exist in the city, I think those are going to tend to naturally have more nonconformity type of issues. And so, and I think the tour did a great job at taking us around and seeing what some of those were, so the commission can start to kind of, strengthen their view on that. But I do think that the data that we saw tonight does show kind of the basic things: the setbacks, the lot coverage, and the height as some of the most fundamental concerns we got to look at and say, if it's a demolition, how does that trigger the nonconformity aspects in our development code? Commissioners, any other comments? Do we want to quickly go through the other questions, the other two questions, just to at least address them in the staff memo? Okay, I'll just briefly mention them.
It looks like we have a comment, Chair Heap.
Oh, okay. Who would like to make a comment? Sorry. Commissioner Phillips, go ahead, Commissioner Phillips.
Yeah. Okay. I think your approach is fine. I just want to make sure I understand how it's going to be accomplished. I believe what the staff is saying, they're going to make some informal public outreach with the critical players in the cities and neighborhoods and get more input on what the impacts are to whatever alternatives we hear. Is that correct?
If that's the direction of the commission, I'll let Director Siegel answer.
Oh, no, that's fine. You're doing fine, Jessica. Thanks. Yes, that's really what we're looking for, some direction on that. And typically, for a long-range planning project, we would begin with kind of a scoping process with the commission to identify, okay, frame the problem, identify the process, what kind of public engagement strategy is really needed to get that information for the commission. This is a little bit different because the initiative actually came out of another process. It came out of the Middle Housing Code Advisory Committee. So we never really had that opportunity to kind of check in with the commission and go, all right, how do you want to approach this? And do you agree with the premise or not? Have we correctly framed the problem? So, we could be prepared before your next work session on this to come back with, more information from what other jurisdictions are doing, as well as a potential outreach strategy that might involve, as you were saying, Commissioner Phillips, contact with key sort of stakeholders, whether they're neighborhood representatives, industry stakeholders, maybe a survey of some kind would be useful, but we haven't really scoped that yet. If you'd like, we can come back for your next meeting with some options.
I don't know of any other way to do it if we don't do it that way. I'm certainly not going to go out in the neighborhood and start asking. I wouldn't know where to go. But the other point is you've got some great resources, and we've met a few of them in here, a couple of ladies, and I'm sure other people in these neighborhood associations. You throw this out, and maybe they've already looked at it, but I'd really be interested in what some of those really active neighborhood association people have to say about this, and tell me what the unintended consequences to whatever we do here. Okay, because it looks like there's going to be some ramifications to whichever direction we go, even including as is. Okay, but my gut tells me 50% is going to cause a lot of unintended consequences. As is, maybe we're not doing as great a job as we should be doing. I don't know if 80% is a good number or not, but it seems like we ought to be trying to find some way to move to more conformity without having a bunch of new houses that cover up lots and are much taller than that exists now. So the flavor, so anyway, I think the resources are there, and I'm certainly not trying to task the city, but I don't know of any other way to do this. Okay.
Yeah, and I would say, I'm sorry, in fairness to the small work group that we did, that did volunteer their time to work with the staff on this, including representatives from one of the neighborhood associations, a builder, and the former chair of the Middle Housing Advisory Committee. We did workshop this over couple of meetings, I think, and then that's what we brought to the commission in February. But I think, they would, I think that we're all in agreement that there's broader outreach and input that would really, be helpful, I think, and would be typical of how we approach these problems and for other projects.
Yeah, Director Siegel, I was just going to add, I think that's a good idea. And I do echo kind of what you're saying, a broader outreach. So, get feedback from, like we always do, from the neighborhood associations, but also, the development community, the builders and other industry associations who may wish to give feedback. So we certainly like to hear from them too. Commissioners, any other comments? Just so we close it out, let me just at least bring up if there's any comments on the last two questions. There was a total of 3 questions in the staff memo, and 2 was the expansion of non-conforming developments, and 3 was the pre-submittal meeting with staff. I was going to say both of those I think should be explored too. Expansion concerning, and then the pre-submittal meeting, I know it adds a little bit of overhead, and the con against that was mentioned as it's complicated already. But the benefit is, having a clear understanding before development occurs, and make sure everybody's on the same page. I think staff can really help, residents and developers who are wanting to do development, and kind of make sure that there's a common understanding of what the code is. And so, those type of pre-application meetings and review meetings, I think are very, very beneficial. So I would definitely, keep those on as we explore in our work sessions, what are, some of the things that we want to have the public consider for non-conforming development. So I think all 3 of them on the staff memo is things that we should continue to pursue. Commissioners, do you have any other comments? Anything? I don't see anyone. If you'd like to make a comment, maybe just call it out. All right. No. So then, thank you, Jessica and Director Siegel. I think the direction from the commission tonight is to continue on with the work session. I think it was a great start, and the tour and then all the data that Jessica provided was excellent. But it is, as we knew, it was a complicated subject, and we want to make sure that if we're changing anything, we're getting it right, and really understanding, what the community wants to see in our development code. So I think, doing the due justice here, diligence here to vet this out will be very beneficial for Lake Oswego. So we'll ask that staff go back and continue to collect some more data as discussed tonight, and then come back with another work session for the commission.
Thank you, Chair. It's very helpful. Thank you, commissioners.
If nothing else, then we'll move on to other business. Item 7.1 on the agenda tonight. This is the nomination and election of chair and vice chair for fiscal year 2020. I think it should be 2022 and 2023, if I'm correct. On the agenda, it said 2021 and 2022, but I think it's 2022 and 2023.
That's correct.
Yeah, no problem. So this is a typo. In the past, there's been some feedback to say that when we have these elections, we like to have all the commissioners present. I was aware of nominations for chair for Holland, Commissioner Leek, and then as vice chair, Commissioner Stewart. Staff, did we have any other nominations, or was that all the nominations we've had?
That was it for now, up to this point.
So Commissioner Leek and Commissioner Stewart are not with us, as we know, tonight. Any feedback from the commission? Would you like to go ahead and do the elections tonight for chair and vice chair? Or would the commission feel more comfortable if Commissioner Leek and Commissioner Stewart were present? I guess I'll ask the commission.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, Commissioner.
My question is, I'm sure they know about this, and my question is that what they want?
Good question, Commissioner Phillips. I had actually asked that similar question, and yes, of course they're aware, and they indicated back to me that they would be happy to serve in those respective roles as Commissioner Leak for chair and Commissioner Stewart for vice chair. And I think Commissioner Stewart would be actually said he'd be okay with any position. So, either chair or vice chair. Yes, they're indicated that they would be happy to serve in those positions. But if there's some concern, that may be a reason why we'd want to wait to double ensure that they're here. It's up to the other commissioners,
Chair Heap,
yes.
I spoke or emailed both of them, and they reconfirmed today that they were still interested.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, I have one other question then. Did I hear you say that Commissioner Stewart would be interested in serving as chair? Or is it only Commissioner Leak that's interested in serving as the chair?
I think the understanding I had from Commissioner Stewart was he's very flexible. He'd be very happy serving as vice chair. And if we had an issue where we didn't have a chair, he would step in and serve as chair. So I wouldn't want to say it. I think if I phrased it that Commissioner Stewart really wanted to be chair, I don't think he expressed that to me. He had expressed that he would be comfortable serving in any of those positions and didn't really have a preference.
I'm comfortable with voting on it tonight if you want. If not, we can wait until they're present, either way you want.
Commissioners, any other comments?
I have no problem with doing it tonight, but if it would be more satisfying to do it when they're here, then that's fine too.
Agreed.
All right. So feedback has been it's okay to do tonight. If any commissioners felt like it would be better to do it at the next meeting, we could. I would say let's go ahead and my recommendation would be to make the vote so that we can start setting up the plans, getting everybody going. By the way, in the past, there's been some interesting situations, I think, where the chair or the vice chair, both the chair and the vice chair has been out. And I think how that was handled was that there was at the beginning of the meeting, there was a kind of an election of a pro tem chair for that meeting. So we don't get into any issues should there be attendance. I think the city staff and procedures and processes are all well defined and in place, and staff does a great job at handling those. So I don't see any concerns. Nobody else objects. I would say let's go forward with the election. All right. Given that we only have kind of one nomination, does everybody feel comfortable? Let me ask the second question. Does everybody feel comfortable of just doing roll call on the vote? Or in the past, we've used ballots and kind of done it so that the voting is recorded, and I guess it's could be viewed under public records laws or whatever. But either way, does anybody have any suggestions or recommendations? My recommendation was just to do a roll call vote. If anybody objects to that and would prefer to have it done, as a kind of a paper ballot vote, we could look at that.
Yeah, Chair Heap, I believe you can do that. I think you'd want to just entertain a motion to put forward that slate of candidates, and then I can help formalize it.
Yeah, correct. That's what we'll do. So if nobody objects to doing a oral vote, then as Director Siegel mentioned, would somebody like to make a motion for approval of the elections for Commissioner Leak as chair for the 2022-2023 year, and Commissioner Stewart as vice chair for the 2022 and 2023 fiscal year?
I so move.
Thank you. Commissioner Rigsby moves. Is there a second?
I second.
Commissioner Phillips seconds. Iris, would you please call the roll?
Heap,
Yes?
Mitchell,
Yes.
Moreno,
Yes.
Phillips,
Yes.
Rigby.
Yes.
Vote passes.
All right, thank you. So congratulations to Commissioner Leak, and congratulations to Commissioner Stewart for being our new chair and vice chair. And by the way, sorry I didn't announce this earlier, but as Director Siegel said, we do have new commissioners serving tonight. So welcome the new commissioners. Maybe if at our next meeting, I'll give you a little time to prepare, but we could do a brief introduction, and our new chair, Commissioner Leak, could kind of announce those introductions. So we'll give a more formal introduction at the next meeting, but really like to send a hearty welcome and thanks to our new commissioners who have joined us tonight here on the commission. Thank you very much. All right. On the agenda, next on the agenda, one second. Schedule review or other business. No, it was other business. Sorry. Item number 8, schedule review. Is there any update you'd like to give on the schedule, Director Siegel?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Heap. Your next regularly scheduled meeting is July 25th, and you'll have a work session on the proposal to establish criteria for exactions for ministerial development. As you may recall, this is following up on the work the city did for adopting middle housing codes, and that'll be coming to you for a work session on July 25th. August 8th is a work session. It's hard to believe, but we're already getting there. For first work session on the annual community development code amendments for 2022. And then the second meeting in August, the 22nd, I did want to check in with the commission on your preference for a meeting time on the 22nd, as that'll be a tour of the Palisades neighborhood, or at least a portion of the Palisades neighborhood, following the neighborhood association's work in developing an overlay zone. So we can coordinate the time with the neighborhood association. My recommendation would be either to do this late afternoon, like 5 o'clock, or to do it in the morning, depending on when the commissioners are available. Just thinking about that, that time of the year can be pretty hot. So looking for your input on that date, August 22nd.
Commissioners, any input on the date and the time? I think what staff is suggesting is reasonable. It can be, very hot. So I think in the interest of, trying to make it as comfortable as possible for the commissioners and the public and staff to, have an effective tour, those are good suggestions. So, 5 o'clock sounds good. I will say that I will be unavailable. I'll be out for that day. But I encourage all the other commissioners to join. Commissioners, any feedback? Is that okay for the date and time?
I would encourage a late afternoon time.
Yeah, Director Siegel, I think that's good. Maybe just one point of order here, just to interrupt for a second. Councilor Mans, I'm sorry, I saw your hand was up earlier. Would you like to make a comment, and then we'll come back to our
yes,
schedule?
This is a scheduling comment. We are on recess in council during the month of August, and I intend to take that time off. I'll try to make it to the 22nd, but I definitely won't be here for August the 8th, nor will I be here on the 25th, as I will be in Detroit, Michigan. So of all the lovely summer places to go.
It's my hometown. Yeah.
Right.
Great place. Yeah.
I love it.
Right.
I absolutely love it. But thank you. And I just wanted to let everyone know that, so I'm not remiss in my duties here.
All right. Thank you, Councilor Mans. Director Siegel, anything else on the schedule that you'd like to get feedback from the commission on?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the feedback on the tour date, which we'll coordinate with the Palisades Neighborhood Association on the meeting time. One other thing, I just wanted to check in with the commission on alternate meeting days. Now, periodically, Monday falls on a holiday that the city recognizes a national holiday, and the commission meetings in the past have shifted to Wednesdays. Now that we're in the new building, we've been in the building for quite some time now, but now that we're all meeting in person, or typically hosting the meetings in person, we've discovered there are conflicts between the municipal court and our commission meetings. Not just the planning commission, but the DRC has the same conflict on those Wednesdays when Monday would fall on a national holiday, and we would in the past meet on a Wednesday. So this is not every Wednesday, but sometimes the court, is using all of that time, and it's not physically possible to set up the room for a commission meeting, as the court is adjourning at 5 o'clock. And then at other times, the court has jury trials on Mondays. And this is something that we haven't had to address in the past, but now we're seeing that it can become a conflict, and it's not flexible. Those jury trials cannot be moved. They're oftentimes they have expert witnesses who are coming in from out of the area, and it's not flexible. So what we'd like to do is just we're not rescheduling, we're not asking you to reschedule any of your regular meetings, but we would like to know on those rare occasions when we do need to shift to another date, if Tuesday, would be the second or the fourth Tuesday of the month. So that would not conflict with the council meeting typically, unless the council has a special meeting, or alternatively on a Thursday. Kind of looking for some input on that. And the first occasion where this comes up is in October. So October 24th, we're anticipating the court will have a jury trial on that Monday, and we would be looking to, with your consent, to schedule that either on the Tuesday, the 25th, or on Thursday, the 27th of October.
Commissioners, any feedback? Director Siegel, my feedback would be, I think, keeping it as close as possible to our normal Mondays. So the Tuesday would be more preferable than Thursday, just because it seems like that's kind of an odd time for the commission. I think many people would understand if there's either a holiday or, it's actually a court jury trial that's coming up, that if it was just moved by one day, that would be kind of more, I think, accommodating to the public, but that's just my opinion. Commissioners, any other input? So yeah, Tuesdays I think would be good, but commissioners, any other input, views?
And this would be principally for public hearing dates. So if like this evening, the commission, it was a work session, and I guess that's another question that I would ask is if it's not a public hearing night, would the commission prefer to meet just virtually, and then you could keep your regular meeting time, or if you're anticipating public comment at one of these work sessions, would you prefer to have that meeting live in person, and of course also a virtual option, but shifted to another date?
Commissioners, comments on that?
Yeah,
I wouldn't mind moving virtually.
The October date that I was discussing, October, we anticipate that will be a public hearing. So I just wanted to get that clear.
I wouldn't mind moving virtually if that would keep the same time. To me, that would be preferable, but I am flexible.
Thank you, Commissioner Rigsby. Any other comments? Director Siegel, just a point of clarification. I think you were kind of alluding to, for work sessions, I think meeting virtually, no issue. For public hearings, yeah, that may be a different story, where we want to meet in person and have the opportunity for people to come in and talk in person. So I think for work sessions it would be okay, but for public hearings, yeah, we'd probably want to look at doing a different day, and having the option to take public testimony in person. Yeah. Commissioners, any other comments? Yeah. Looks like that's the kind of recommendation then of the commission. And Director Siegel, is there any further information or clarification that we can give?
Thank you. That's very helpful. So for that October date, we'll look at we'll check in with the city manager's office and see if that's available on Tuesday, the 25th. And then going forward, we'll just prioritize the public hearings in terms of changing the date to make sure we can meet in person.
Sure.
Work sessions, it sounds like we're okay with keeping those virtual to stay on the same date.
Okay. Any other schedule updates? None? All right, thank you, Director Siegel. I think that was it for the agenda tonight. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting for tonight?
I move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Mitchell. All those in favor? Aye. Again, if you could, I'm not sure I heard everybody. Just if you could just say aye or nay.
Aye.
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 Great. The motion's approved. We'll adjourn. So thank you, everybody. Congratulations again to our new chair, Chair Leak, and Vice Chair Stewart. And welcome to our new commissioners. We're very happy to have you on board tonight, and welcome to the commission. And good night. Hope everybody has a good night. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.